would like to start by introducing ourselves a little bit. My name is Ayya Santacitta. I'm a nun since over 30 years and I'm born in Austria. I've been training in the Theravada forest tradition and also in the Nyingma tradition of the Vajrayana for many years, and have been invited to come to California in 2009 and started together with another Bhikkhuni forest monastery in the Sierra foothills, which we recently have given up because of the wildfire situation out there. It was very difficult to manage the land for just a few nuns. So I'm now here in San Rafael, which is just on the north side of the Golden Gate Bridge. And I have started a good year ago the Aloka Earth Room, where I live and teach now. And that's where I'm sitting today. I'm sitting in the Earth Room. And I look forward teaching together with Celeste. It's our first time that we teach together. And also the first time that I teach for a Big Bear Retreat Center. And looking forward to see the land in October and maybe some of you as well. So that's my introduction. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jay, for hosting us today.
Oh, I'll introduce myself as well. And as I said, I'm so thrilled to see so many faces that I know on the screen and also new faces. And I'm so honored to be here and have the opportunity to teach with Ayya Santacitta for the first time. I've practiced with her for several years now online and had the opportunity in person as well. And so this feels very, very auspicious to have the chance to teach together for the first time. And I'm so happy to introduce many of you maybe for the first time to her beautiful teachings. Happy to be here with Big Bear Retreat Center, a center close to my heart. And yeah, thank you, Che, for hosting us. And Paula and Marianne, who are also involved at the center. It's wonderful to have you here. I've been practicing the Dharma, I guess, since 2001, 2002, something like that. I entered my first Buddhist meditation retreat center at that time and felt like I entered a temple of radical sanity. And the Dharma came to the center of my life very early on because of having a lot of suffering early on. I was quite motivated to practice, and I've been very interested in long retreat, and I've practiced on long retreat for many years now, each year. So really value that each of you chose to spend your time this way today, and I'm looking forward to being together. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Celeste. So let's just start by, looking onto the Zoom screen and seeing with whom you are here. Just, look through those 2 pages and seeing, who is drawn by this kind of a topic. The Dharma is made for these times, an exploration of the 4 distortions of perception. Taking in the community and, that we are building this space together. It's not just about, receiving, but it's also about co-creating this container together. So we might have the support we usually don't have when we are on our own to lean into something bigger than just our own bodies and minds. We're getting a taste of the 3rd refuge of Sangha community. And I'm now going to just start with a guided meditation on arriving here in the half day long. Just starting by noticing how you're feeling in the body and in the mind, what you're bringing with you to this gathering, and everything has a place. Everything can come. It's not about having a blank mind or forcing the mind to be quiet or anything like that, but it's more about knowing what is present and making space for it. And then through that spaciousness, we can begin, to digest and metabolize whatever is up right now. And through this digesting and metabolizing, we integrate it into our being. We are growing and opening, and we are being able to have more of life land in us. And, working with those 4 distortions of perception is a way of creating more space by undoing some extra thing, our minds are doing because of conditioning and because of ignorance. And by noticing that a bit more clearly and fully, it starts to lose its power over us. And now for the first guided meditation, I'm going to speak to just one of the 4 distortions, which is, in the list, it's the last one. It's called taking that which is actually not beautiful as beautiful, and that relates mainly, in the ancient language of Iron Age India, it was relating to the body, seeing the body not just from outside, but also, seeing the body from inside. Imagining, the body when it is aging, when it gets sick, when it composes back into the earth, when it dies. So just adding an extra frame onto looking at the body. Usually we are conditioned looking at it as something desirable, as something we need to buy more stuff to make it better. We need to do this and do that, and so on and so forth. And to just give a different way of looking in order to broaden the spectrum, making more space again. It's all about, making more space, having more capacity to investigate from many different sides. So sensing your body from inside by just connecting with the weight of the body on the cushion, on the chair. Maybe you can sense the gravity which gently pulls us towards the ground underneath where we are sitting. And no need, to pressurize for sensing anything, but just having that intention. And with the out breath, relaxing, releasing all tensions and doubts, just into the ground around underneath us. Maybe putting, some roots down into the soil, into the mycelium, the root system, underneath where we are sitting. I'm sitting in San Rafael, which is a coast Miwok land. Just arriving. And with the in-breath, we can breathe up the stability and the stillness of the earth. The earth, a process we are inside of. We are part of. We are not at all separate from. Even that can be a perception, a culturally conditioned perception, which we are trying to adjust to something more real by tuning into the fact, that our bodies and the planet are one process. And we can have a direct experience of that through the meditation on the elements and the body parts, which I'm going to guide us in. They belong to the first establishment of mindfulness, very ancient teaching, which is becoming very, very important at this point of our species waking up to the fact, that our narratives, our worldview is no longer capable of taking care of life on Earth. So we are on those, this evolutionary threshold where we, more and more of us, feeling that pressure from the biosphere that something needs to give. And it's, particularly something in our minds which need to give, so that new ways and new solutions can emerge, because we can't find solutions from the same level of mind which has created the problems in the first place. We need to mature, we need to move on, we need to become more real. And the first starting place, for connecting with a different narrative is by experiencing the body as part of the planet. Our bodies have emerged out of the planet through the mediation of our mothers. And when the body dies, it goes back into it. Earth element, water element, fire element, wind element, space element. And that which knows consciousness element. So the body is a riding animal for consciousness for this lifetime, and it's borrowed from nature. And when the time comes, to die, goes back into, it's going to be absorbed. Just like we absorb when we eat an apple, it's absorbed into the body. That's how we go back into the big body of the earth. And we have emerged out of it like a little plant coming out. Other than we can walk, but nevertheless, we never cut the umbilical cord. And because, we are thinking in language, we're thinking with nouns, all of that escapes our awareness because we are so glued to thinking in language. So we want to encourage the mind to have a more intuitive relationship to our embodiment through direct experience. And that's, this meditation on the elements, which is very simple and experiential. And it will change us on a visceral level. The more capacity to attune to reality, more capacity to be in relationship with that which is hard to capture, with the dualistic thinking mind. The thinking mind is a support by giving us an intellectual understanding, what needs to be experienced, what needs to be seen, but then it's a direct sensing and feeling. And the thinking mind is just at best quiet or supportive, but not capable of going there. It's like, if you have a gift, it's like the packaging of the gift, but the gift is inside that packaging. And if you get stuck on the packaging, then you're never going to get the gift. So just, let's start by, pressing our teeth together really strong and then feeling that hardness, the structure of the teeth, which are, the tips of the bones. That's the quality of earth element, is structure and hardness as opposed to softness. And we can particularly easy, sense that in the bones, the teeth and the fingernails and the toenails, have this direct experience. And I'm going to guide us in a body sweeping, body scanning meditation where we pay attention to bones and hardness. And there's no need for you, to do anything in particular, just keeping an open mind and listening to what is being said, and then allowing the mind to respond by itself. The mind knows what to do. So not hunting after anything, but allowing the mind to be filled with the perception which is encouraged through my guidance. So let's go to the top of the head and sensing into bones, the skull bones, earth element, hardness. And just let it come to you. Might take some time for you to connect. There might be some numbness and confusion. Allow that to also be there. And if you feel like, oh, I don't know what to do, and I don't know, and I'm missing out, and all of that can also be there. That's just a habit of the mind, because there's nothing to do. It's all about opening and being. So then we come from the head, come to the jaw, hardness, bones, teeth, earth element. And just staying with the simplicity of that direct experience. Then from the jaw, we come to the neck with the vertebrae, hardness, earth element. Shoulders, hardness, earth element. And then the upper arms, hardness, earth element. The lower arms, hardness, earth element. The hands, hardness, earth element. And then we come to the torso with the spine and the rib cage, hardness, earth element. The pelvis and the hips, hardness, earth element. The upper legs, hardness, earth element. The lower legs, hardness, earth element. And the feet, hardness, earth element. This whole body is permeated by earth element. Earth element internally in the bones, and earth element externally in the rocks and the mountains, the concrete in the cities, is exactly the same earth element. Earth element is empty, empty of a self. And if we don't ingest earth elements through food for 1 or 2 months, the body is going to shut down. So taking in food through eating and then letting it go by going to the bathroom, this makes us, part of the great earth. We are not on top of the earth like on a stage, but we are participants of the earth. And that's a shift in perception, a shift in narrative, a shift in worldview, which needs to be fostered through individual interest and practice so that it will take root in the culture and open us up to new solutions and appreciation, of what it means to be a human being completely dependent on the more than human world. Making space for this new perception to sink in. The intellect can't really complete this work. It can only open the door, and then we need to walk through by individually experiencing it. We never cut the umbilical cord towards the planet. It's just invisible. But then if we, make an adjustment in perception, it suddenly becomes visible. Then, allowing that to change us. And in order for earth element to, make up a form, there needs to also be cohesion, which brings us to the next element, which is the water element, which stands for cohesion, wetness, flow. And we can experience that in the soft flesh, which is on top of the bones. The flesh, which is permeated by a lot of liquids, particular blood and lymph and other liquids. The body consists about 70% of water. So we're going to do a second sweep now, scan, starting with the feet, flesh, softness, water element. And then from the feet, we come to the legs, flesh, softness, water element. Keep on scanning up to the pelvis, flesh, water element. The torso with all of the organs inside, flesh, water element. The hands, flesh, water element. The arms, flesh, water element. The shoulders, flesh, water element. The neck, flesh, water element. The head, flesh, water element. Particularly in the mouth and in the eyes, we can sense the wetness. This whole body is permeated by water element. Water element internally and water element externally in the rivers, the lakes, the oceans, the rains is exactly the same water element. Water element is empty of a self. And if we don't drink for 5-6 days, the body is going to shut down. It's completely dependent on the intake of water and other beverages, then going to the bathroom and releasing again. And in order for a water element to be forming a body, it needs to be of a certain temperature. If it's too hot, it evaporates. If it's too cold, it freezes. takes us to the next element, which is the fire element, which stands for temperature, hot and cold. And we can sense that in particular on the skin, where the skin meets the air in the room. Gonna sweep down again from the top of the head, skin, fire element. Come to the neck, skin, fire element. The shoulders and the arms, skin, fire element. The hands, skin, fire element. Torso, skin, fire element. The hips, the pelvis, skin, fire element. The legs, skin, fire element. The feet, skin, fire element. This whole body is permeated by fire element. Fire element internally and fire element externally, coming from the sun and from the center of the earth, is exactly the same fire element. Fire element is empty, empty of a self. And these bodies, they can only exist in a certain range of temperature, which we can extend with housing, clothing, and heating, but it's only in a certain range. And if the body goes beyond or below, it's going to shut down. Again, showing us the incredible vulnerability and interdependence of these bodies with the more than human world. Just allowing that to be experienced. And heat is the result of friction, which brings us to the next element, which is the wind element, which stands for movement, expansion and contraction, pressure. And we can experience that with the breathing process. The chest expanding and contracting. You're breathing in the oxygen, which is provided by the plant life, and breathing out CO2, which is then inhaled by the trees, and they build up their bodies with the CO2 and releasing oxygen. And if we, don't breathe for about 3 to 7 minutes, the body is going to shut down. So again, showing us, our total interdependence with the modern human world. And this is not just a stage on which we are walking around, liking some things and not liking others. We are it. body is a piece of land, and it is, born out of the planet like a wave on the top of the ocean. It's a wave on the top of the soil, coming out, through the mediation of our mothers and being nourished by all kinds of fruits and plants and animals, which also emerge out of the soil. This is just a very different way of looking at embodiment. And we need to train ourselves in it because it's not yet part of our cultural transmission or upbringing. And then the last of the first 5 elements is the space element. As we are breathing out, we are relaxing into the space we are sitting in. And there's also spaces in the body, the ears, the mouth, the stomach, the womb, the eye sockets, the nose. And the space, which is not ending at the walls of the room where we are sitting in. The universe expanding at this point. Spaciousness. And then being aware of that which knows about all of this. The space and the other elements. The knowing, awareness. And in this way we have like landed in the day long now, half day long. And getting a handle on the vulnerability of what it means, to be a human body, to have a human body. And being with that recognition is totally necessary for the transformation to happen. The integration of this information, to let that what we have experienced become part of our form, to have that information become absorbed and integrated so that we more and more start to live from that place without the thinking mind. But just it becomes our second nature as we are recognizing it and repeating, the recognition as a meditation practice. And then, allowing a new paradigm, a new narrative about what it is to be a human being, allowing that to dawn in its own time, like the sun rising. We can't pull on the sun to come up quicker or anything like that. But it's just paying attention, adding precision, and then seeing what happens, making space. And leaning also into the Sangha, to be our support system for cultivating those seeds slowly in their own time. We can't rush it, but we can give it our attention, our precision, our willingness. That's where we do have control. We can make priorities. And then we have to see and allow nature to take over. By the simple fact, that our bodies and the body of the planet are one process. It's like plugging in, a USB stick into the computer, using the body to plug in, rather than using the body to distract ourselves. So that's, the distortion of being stuck on the outer surface of the body because it's beautiful or because it isn't as beautiful as the newspapers tell us it should be, or anything in between. And diving deeper. So, from that place, I'm now gonna just give a little overview about the theme of these 4 distortions of perception. And in the Pali language, they are called the 4 vipallasa. And they have been translated, in many different ways. I'm just going to share a few with you. When Bhikkhu Bodhi translates them as inversions, then Joseph Goldstein translates the word vipallasa as hallucinations. Ajahn Sujato and Andrew Odlensky translated as distortions. And in the older translations, it has been called perversions even. So that's different words here can give us a kind of a sense of what is meant. And the word inversions is actually coming the closest to the literal translation of vipallasa. And the original term consists of 3 parts, vipariyasa. And the first part, the prefix vi, carries a sense of separation and removal. And then the second prefix is pari, meaning around or complete. And it's related to the word perimeter, which you might have heard. And then the third word is a verb, as, meaning to throw. So putting all of those 3 parts together creates an image of the mind taking something up and then turning it around and throwing it down like this. Taking up a perception, turning it around, and then throwing it. So that's what vipariyasa means, and which is translated as distortion, inversion, hallucination. So it's a distortion of reality by the perceptual and cognitive apparatus of the brain. And through these different meditation techniques and reflections, we want to counteract that automatic action, of the brain to present us with something by filling in the gaps. The same thing, for example, you're walking in the forest and you can see the trees from one side, but then, your mind fills in that the back of the trees is looking like this, even you don't see it. But that's what the mind just innocently fills in for us. And sometimes it's not a big deal, but sometimes it is a big deal. And we want to, get some clarity about that. And they are, fundamental to what in the Buddhist teaching is called avijja, or ignorance. These 4 distortions of perceptions are basically a way how we can investigate ignorance, avijja, or delusion, which is actually also, spoken about in the Buddhist teaching in terms of the hindrances, if you have heard of those. So they are very much part and parcel of being a human being, and being conditioned in the way we are, where we are thinking in terms of language. And in particular, the nouns, are very much throwing us off, because nouns, give us an idea of that there would be something unchanging. It's very helpful, for people living together and communicating. We need this way of explaining each other. But when we go deeper, we can see they are just labels, and they have a certain function, but they can never really demonstrate reality. But nevertheless, because we are brought up in this way since the very moment, we have been coming into this life, the first words we were learning were nouns. Mama, papa, table, milk, or whatever we were learning, we are deeply, deeply conditioned. And this kind of practice, helps us to recognize it. That's where we start, to just recognize the situation. And understanding, what the function is, and not stopping there, And through those meditation practices, in all of the 4 of the establishments of mindfulness, or they are called in the Pali language the 4 satipatthana, we start to pay attention, to particular features of our experience we usually don't pay attention to. And then, once we start to meditate, we just, opening up the walls of perception, and starting to live in a bigger and bigger world. And liberating us, from a mistaken sense of identity, that this body and this mind is me, and everything else is separate. And then we start to understand these were just assumptions. And it's like, when you're walking with a new pair of shoes for like an afternoon, and they're really much too tight, and then you come home and take off the shoe, and there's this feeling, and that's, what these meditations can help us. Oh, it's not all about me, I'm not the one who has to fix it all. And it's a sense of relief, really. But first, it's also a sense of like, wow, of confusion. If we are used to live in the small world, then we are afraid of looking beyond. But once we get used to it, and also have the support of Sangha and so on, it actually turns out to be a great relief. And then, those distortions of perception are recognized for what they are. They are simply distortions. And we don't need to be under them, We can choose to slowly but surely wash them out, Like if you have a piece of cloth with a big stain, if you wash it one time, it's not gonna disappear, but you need to keep on washing, need to apply yourself. And that's how it works with those distortion of perception as well. There's no, super quick fix. The Buddhist meditation practice is not a quick fix. Even, in the beginning, in the honeymoon phase, it it might feel like this. That's great, enjoy it while it lasts. But it's we are in for the long haul if we want to remove those distortions. And then, the so-called honeymoon phase changes into the kitchen sink phase. And that's how it's going to be for quite a long time. And that's why we need Sangha in particular. When it's all going well, we feel like, yeah, we're on top of everything. But then it turns out to be a really deep work, which needs a lot of endurance and also love for ourselves, that we give that to ourselves, and also through that our capacity for resilience increases, and then we can also be much more here for others. And in particular, for the big questions of our times, as we are waking up to the fact, that the biosphere needs us to participate differently. And I have a beautiful quote here for us. There's quite a few suttas in the Pali Canon which end with a certain stock phrase, which I want to share with you because it relates to the vipallasa, to the inversions. And that's a phrase quite in the ancient language of Iron Age India, but nevertheless I find it really inspiring. And it goes like this. When this was said, then the name of the person comes, said to the Blessed One, which is the Buddha, Magnificent Master Gautama. That's the Buddha. Magnificent Master Gautama. The Dharma has been made clear in many ways by Master Gautama, as though he were turning upright what had been turned upside down, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to the one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. So I read it again. Magnificent Master Gautama, magnificent Master Gautama. The Dharma has been made clear in many ways by Master Gautama, as though he were turning upright what had been turned upside down, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. And that's, what we want to cultivate by reflecting on the four vipallasa. That which was turned upside down, to turn it back, how it really is. And, those distortions of perceptions, they occur on 3 levels of depths and scale in the mind. And the first one is on the level of perception, in Pali called, sanya vipallasa. And that's, the information which comes in through the sense doors, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. In the, Buddhist teaching, the mind is also considered to be a sense organ. Like the nose smells and the mind thinks, and the ear hears, and the tongue tastes. So the mind isn't considered, to be like a special in any way. It's just like one of the 6 senses, and it thinks too much generally. And that's why you're here, because you all want to find ways, to handle that 6th sense organ of the mind. So, so the first one, sanya vipallasa, or vipallasa of perception, is the information which comes in through the senses. And for example, a very good example is, let's say we go into the forest and then we see something long and narrow lying on the ground. And then, whoops, for a moment we think it's a snake. And then, the body kind of starts to contract for a moment, like a fright comes. And then we look again, oh, it's just a root from a tree, or it's just a piece of rope. And then the body relaxes again and we keep on walking. So that's a level of distortion which can be corrected by precision and scrutiny. And it's relatively easy to handle. Or the same thing, you go down the street and then you think, oh, that's my friend. And then you look again, oh no, it just looks very similar, but it's not him or not her. So that's the first level. And then the second one is Chitta Vipallasa. This is Vipallasa on the level of thought. That's the next higher level of mental processing and thinking and pondering. So when the mind, elaborates on the perceptions with certain thought patterns, and if the perception was distorted, then of course the thought patterns around it are also distorted. For example, if I, see the piece of rope on the ground and think it's a snake and don't look further, but just keep on kind of thinking, oh my God, it's a snake, and just start running away, not investigating, but just believing the perception and then make a big deal out of it by thinking about it, getting really anxious, and then becoming even afraid, to go back into the forest because there's snakes everywhere. So that's the second level. And, and through that, my life becomes small because I suddenly don't allow myself to go into the forest anymore because it makes me too nervous. So I only go with other people or so on. So I make a sacrifice in terms of how I live, how I inhabit my world and my body. And then the next one is, that these habitual thinking patterns, they can become really very, very strong. And that's the next Vipallasa. It's called Ditthi Vipallasa, or Vipallasa of view, distortion of views. And that, nobody can convince me anymore that it's fine to go into the forest. There might be some snakes, but it's not going to be full of snakes. So when like a certain sense of hardening, of the thinking patterns becomes a view, a phobia, for example, and then, our life contracts even more. And then no amount of evidence, can undo this. Then we are really stuck. And then we still have a chance maybe to go to a specialist, maybe to a therapist and really work on it. It's still possible to work oneself out of it, but it's going to take a lot of work. And it starts by not investigating, by believing the surface appearance. So this is those three levels: perception, thought, and view. Getting, deeper and deeper and more difficult to dislodge. So, they are formed by, it starts with the perceptions and then strengthened by our thoughts, and then becoming a view, and then all together, they form our character, make up our unique personality. And then there is also extreme different perceptions, depending on which realm we are born in. For example, for us, rotten meat is really something awful. We just want to run away from it. But for a vulture, for example, rotten meat is a feast. So there is very different views, depending on in which realm we are born, what being we are. If we are a vulture or human being. That's also something to consider. And, those phobias which we can develop, they have something to do with trauma, like early perceptions which we might have had to endure when we were very little. And then, we have to put in some work to investigate with support of others and maybe undo that, untangle that. And metabolize it and allow it to be integrated and change us. And in a way, this is also what we need to do in terms of cultural narrative. There's like certain very deep-seated views, for example, that we are separate from planet Earth and we need to fight, with nature to get it all set up in a way so we are safe. And in that way, we have created a lot of unsafety for us because it's based on a wrong perception. We are not separate. And then, we've built up all of those patterns of thinking and all of the systems, how we conduct our lives, and they are self-defeating by now. So it's that work, it's not only our personal work in terms of our personality, of our character, but it's also in a big context, the work of our culture, of our civilization. So it's a very expedient way, of investigating experience. And it does also really tie up very well with what's called the three characteristics, which are one of the core teachings of Buddhism. You might have heard about, speaking about impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self or emptiness. So like 3 of the 4 vipallasa are basically these 3 characteristics. And then there's this one more added I have been speaking with you about today, about in the guided meditation, about the body, being more than what meets the eye from outside. So, in terms of the Buddha's teaching, we can see that as the distortions of perceptions are like a mental disease, basically, which needs to be healed and bring us back to health, because these delusions are at the root of a lot of our suffering. And mental health can be restored by correcting the flaws, how the mind operates. Because the mind tends to always fill in the gaps. And if we, take the time and the energy to look more deeply, to kind of bring more precision into the looking, what we are seeing will be more and more the way things truly are, rather than allowing the mind to just fill in the gaps. And then, filling in the gaps, it ends up with those distortions of perception. And as I said before, very simple example with mistaking a rope for a snake. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism, to keep us on the side of survivor and then to be overdoing it, basically. Not every long, thin thing is a snake. This can be a spaghetti, it can be a rope, it can be so many different things, But the body first think it's something dangerous. It must be a snake. Because if you one time don't see it, it could be ending up in the body dying, you know. So it makes sense, but we need to broaden the view. And we no longer live in the jungle, you know, all of us. We have different issues now to contend with. So I think, you know, that's kind of an overview and gives us, you know, an insight into the equipment, you know, we have got by simply having a body and a mind. A body, you know, which has been developed on this planet since almost, you know, over 4 billion years. So there's a lot of luggage, you know, which is in there. Some of it is no longer really needed, but it still operates because it has been developed in times, you know, when we were living not in cities. The bodies are still, you know, what they were like 200,000 years ago when Homo sapiens, you know, appeared on this planet. So the bodies haven't changed much, but the way how we live has changed tremendously. So we need to get a handle on that, and we can get a handle on that. And we are doing it. That's the good news. So now we have a little time for stretching, or if you like, do some movement, if that works for you, or also you could do some walking meditation. And then after that, we come back here into the Zoom room. And then at 11:30, Celeste is going to offer a Dharma reflection followed by a guided meditation. So please, you know, have some time to stretch and move or walk, whatever works, and then see you back here at 11:30. Thank you so much. And I'm now going to hand over to Celeste for her reflection and guided meditation. And I just would like to let you know, because of my monastic rules, you know, I have to finish my meal before 1 o'clock. So I'm going to close my camera and gonna receive my meal soon. And then I'll still be present, but without camera. And then when I'm finished, I'm gonna come back. And thank you, Celeste, for taking over.
So just checking sound. How is it? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, your sound is good.
Great. That helps when you're giving a talk, if you can actually hear the words I'm saying. So just want to start with this word relief that came up in Ayya Santacitta's talk. And when I was introducing myself, I was mentioning the radical sanity that I experienced in the first Dharma hall I ever stepped into, where people were meditating. And there was a deep relief I felt in coming home to things as they actually were, being in a room with people who really wanted to know the truth of things as they actually are. And, you know, this is really the Buddha's teaching. When we talk about insight practice or insight meditation, you know, sometimes I meet people who are not familiar. Well, what does that mean, insight? You know, is it like being an insightful person? You've got various reflections intellectually. That's really not what the Buddha was pointing to. So when we're practicing insight meditation, insight into what? So it's insight into the nature of reality, right? Insight into the nature of things as they actually are. And so one of the things that we see when we begin meditating, if we're really practicing and we're looking carefully, is we see how often we're not seeing things as they actually are. And so that was actually a relief for me when I started meditating, to see how out of control my mind was and how many different, ways in which these distortions of perception, I didn't know that term at that time, but the different ways that that was showing up, I could see, what Ayya Santacitta was pointing out about the 3 levels, right? Perception, thought, view, the different ways in which my mind would get entangled. And then so often I would discover how wrong I was. And that was actually really helpful to see, because I could really feel how, in seeing kind of the wrong views there in the mind, that there was a possibility of clarity, that I feel like as human beings, we have an intuitive kind of leaning in this direction, right? There's a part of us that really does want to know how it is, and knows that when we come into contact with things as they actually are, that there's a harmony there, that there's a relief in being in harmony with things as they actually are, even if the habit of our mind is to distort, to reflexively move away from, right? With these 4, to take what is impermanent as permanent, or what is not self to be self, or what is actually suffering, that the mind tries to grab onto what's pleasant and think that that's happiness, not recognizing that our habit of grasping and clinging and craving is actually creating suffering for us, that we have this habit, right? And then the taking that which is not beautiful to be beautiful, that we have these habits, and that we actually can work with them. And so, when we're practicing, and again, really, really appreciating the choice to be here, right? Really appreciating the choice to spend your time and energy this way, because practicing for an intensive period like this gives a mind and heart an opportunity to start to stabilize and see things more clearly. So it's that analogy, maybe you've heard, the sand or the sediment or the dirt that's swirling around in a glass of water, and the untrained mind, when we're lost in the momentum of activity and busyness, it's that swirling, right? It's that swirling that is contributing to filling in the gaps that Ayya Santacitta was pointing to, right? It's filling in the gaps of experience, but we're not really resting in the center of things as they actually are. So when we practice in this way, the water starts to become clear, right? So this sediment, this sand of the swirling, overactive mind that's not perceiving things clearly, it begins to settle. Okay? And, again, the Buddha's fundamental teaching about working with suffering is just that we're not seeing clearly. Right? This fundamental ignorance, the untrained mind and heart, is just not seeing things as they actually are. So when we are practicing, we're training to rest our attention with our moment-to-moment experience and practice with the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Some of that fundamental ignorance or delusion has the opportunity to begin to drop away. We start to see things more clearly. So part of what we see are these 4, right? And as Ayya Santacitta was just naming, the 3 marks of existence, the constantly changing nature of experience, the sense that there's no permanent, fixed, solid self here, that it's all happening to, and then again, the dukkha, the stress, the unsatisfactoriness of all of this. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about an experience that I had. Well, actually, before I do that, I think I want to share something. So the mind is usually moving too quickly to actually see these things, to notice how much things are changing all the time. And I have a story that I wanted to share with all of you about my own experience of seeing into kind of the nature of my own mind. And just to say that on my very first retreat that I sat, it was a short retreat. So I had sat day-long retreats, I had sat weekend retreats. But the first time I did a silent insight meditation retreat was maybe only 4 nights, I think. And, I never, it was so profoundly transformative. I could never go back. I could never go back to seeing things the way I saw them before. Right? So I really saw how my mind would create this added unnecessary suffering, and how so much of the sense of unsatisfactoriness, unease, emotional turmoil, just the various kinds of dukkha, how it was actually, this was arising within my own mind based on, in some ways, wrong perception, right? Which conditioned thoughts that I was identified with, which conditioned views, and how I was suffering as a result of that. It's very, very clear to see. There's a teaching where, I think it might be from the Zen tradition, where they ask, why do we stumble on level ground? Why do we stumble on level ground? And for me, the experience of being on retreat was the level ground in which I could see the stumbling. How was I stumbling on level ground? How had I been stumbling on level ground my whole life? The ground was leveled so I could see. And so the teachings are designed to show us the nature of our mind. Right? That insight that we experience can be liberating. So that was a very small but profound experience of seeing, right? That nothing was happening on retreat, except for that I needed to sit and walk, listen to the teachings, just like we're doing today. And so I could really see it. And the response actually to that inquiry, why do we stumble on level ground, is it's only because the heart runs wild. The heart runs wild. The mind runs wild in all these ways, trying to make solid that which is constantly changing, trying to find a self where there's not one, right? Trying to make reality into something fixed and solid, trying to hang our hat somewhere with our dukkha, right? Our secondary suffering that we are actually creating. The mind's looking for whose fault is that, right? Not seeing things so clearly. So the story that I want to share with you around perception, this was actually from my first long retreat, my first month-long retreat. And I was practicing with my Dharma friend and colleague. I'll share with you, maybe some of you know her, and she's fine with my sharing the story. So I have her permission, but her name is Beth. sternly, and she's been meditating very long time. We had known each other some years before the month-long retreat, and there were no more individual rooms left. Maybe you've been in that position. I'm going to practice with the mindful roommate in silence. And so she wanted to be my roommate because we knew each other. So there we were in this small room, and she was used to having her own room on retreat, and she wanted some privacy. So what she did was she hung a sheet up on the side of the room where her bed was. And so the sheet really enshrouded her bed area, so she had some privacy. And, over time, with the weeks going on of practice, we fell into a silent routine together as practitioners sharing the space. And I would go to bed pretty early, would come in the room, and then, get ready for bed. And then I would turn the lamp off. And sometimes she would be in there reading. I know you're not supposed to read. Maybe she doesn't want me to tell you that part, but she would be in there still awake and have the lamp on. And then when I would turn my lamp off, then she'd turn her lamp off, and, we'd rest and we'd sleep. And so there was one night where I was very tired and I hadn't gotten very good rest, and, came in, did the bedtime routine. She was in there, lamp was on, and I turned my lamp off, and she kept her lamp on. In my mind, fine, I have equanimity, I'm just noticing what's happening inside me, tiredness, okay. 10 minutes goes by, irritation, another 5 minutes goes by, the mind starts to run wild, right? Why is she keeping her lamp on? Like, doesn't she know I need to rest? Turn my lamp off. It's so inconsiderate. I'm so tired. On and on the mind, right? The way our minds do. And I was noticing the relationship between the thoughts and the mind about, how wrong she was, obviously how right I was to need to rest, and, all these kinds of things our minds do. And then how that would feed the state of the aversion and the irritation and so on. And so, I was kind of worked up. I was noticing in the body, there was tension and contraction and all these thoughts and this inner storm, this inner hindrance attack of the aversion and the righteousness around it, and all the thoughts and ideas about her and all of that. And, how could Beth be doing this? And she's a practitioner and so on, until the door opened to the room, and there stood Beth. And my mind did what maybe your mind is doing now, where it was so confusing. How could Beth be in there, keeping her light on, being so inconsiderate? And then there's Beth. There's another Beth. What's happening? So my mind in that moment completely dissolved. Right? All of the thoughts and the perception, right? Light on, conditioned the view, right? The perception of light on conditioned the thoughts about the person and the view that she was in the room. The mind didn't consider the possibility that maybe she'd left her light on and she wasn't there because the sheet, right? The sheet created these conditions, right? And so in that moment of recognizing lamp was on, but nobody was there doing this, the aversion completely dissolved, no longer taking personally this experience. And, you may hear the story and think it's kind of one of those, well, actually, to finish the story. So then when she came in, she did not understand what was happening in my mind, because I looked at her and I burst out laughing. I just couldn't believe it. It was like all those thoughts, all those ideas, all those views, totally empty. And I couldn't stop laughing, which of course, I'm sure our roommates or our people on the other side of the walls did not appreciate, trying to rest in silence. And so she started laughing with me, but she didn't know what was happening. And I didn't break silence to tell her. I think I told her the story later. But you may hear that and think, okay, this is a story about retreat. But it's a story about what's happening all the time in daily life. And yet we never see the person open the door and have the bubble burst of all of our thoughts and views and opinions that are causing us suffering. That's why I'm telling this story, right? I was suffering in that moment for no reason, except what was happening in the mind, except this wrong view. And how often do we think we're so right? We're certain. There's a certainty that happens in the mind, right, that doesn't always serve us, right? That attachment to our views or opinions that we don't recognize. And so just as Ayya Santacitta was sharing about seeing the snake, right? Seeing the snake in the forest and how many snakes that we're certain that's a snake, and we go to fear and we're suffering out of this fear and we're creating views around it. Right? And it's not a snake. So where in our lives can we start to pause and practice? One way we can say, don't know mind around perception. What's really happening here? And we can practice with these four specifically, noticing, right, where the mind is acting surprised about impermanence. We know this, right? We know it intellectually, and yet the mind reflexively moves away from that truth. And so where we can pause and notice, yeah, oh, it's like this, and begin to turn the mind towards, right? Because how many times are we not seeing things clearly? And it's actually causing us suffering, that identification with our views. The first book I ever read on Buddhism, I read when I was 17 years old. And it was a book called Be an Island. It was from a wonderful teacher, Ayya, who's since passed away. But I read this, and this quote has stayed with me ever since I was a teenager. She says, mental and physical phenomena are constantly coming and going, changing without pause. When we hang on to them and consider them ours, we will believe any story our mind tells us without discrimination. We consist of body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, which we grip tightly and believe to be me and mine. We need to take a step back and be a neutral observer of the whole process. The arising and ceasing, which are our teachers, never rest. The arising and ceasing, which are our teachers, never rest. So, and these body, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, these are the 5 aggregates. You might want to look into that. I don't have time to go into all that today, but we can, again, take those to be a me, right? This identification, right? Arising and ceasing. Sometimes the mind only wants to turn towards arising. We don't want to see the endings. We're not noticing the changing nature of experience. So mental, physical phenomena, the stories we tell ourselves, the thoughts in the mind we don't notice, that we habitually identify with, right? Like I was doing there on retreat. when we're not mindful of them as simply mental phenomena, right? Thoughts thinking themselves, as Ayya Santacitta was naming this is one of the chitta is in the senses, right? In Buddhism. So the mind is just, we say sometimes it's secreting thoughts the way the mouth secretes saliva. Mind is just thinking. But then are we noticing that? Are we identified with? Are we lost, right? When we hang on to those kinds of thoughts or wrong view, the perception that turns into a whole view, right? Consider them ours, believe any story our mind tells us. Not so helpful. So she's pointing to something here. Not I, not me, not mine. An impersonal, changing stream of experience. When we don't see that impersonal, changing nature of experience, when I don't see the lamp on is not personal, nobody's there doing that in that moment. Okay? I believed those stories in the mind, those interpretations, the mind again filling in the gaps and suffering over that. So learning to reflect. How am I identified with? Investigating in your own experience where you might be gripping tightly, believing to be me and mine. And then seeing impermanence more clearly. So this from Thich Nhat Hanh, he says impermanence means being transformed at every moment. This is reality. And since there is nothing unchanging, how can there be a permanent self, a separate self? When we say self, we mean something that is always itself, unchanging day after day. But nothing is like that. Our body is impermanent. Our emotions are impermanent. And our perceptions are impermanent. Our anger, our sadness, our love, our hatred, and our consciousness are also impermanent. So impermanence means being transformed at every moment. If phenomena is transforming at every moment, there's no fixed me here who it's all happening to, right? This me too, inherently impermanent, changing, not separate from the rest of phenomena. Otherwise, if there were a me here making a choice, right, probably wouldn't choose aging, sickness, pain, physical pain, right? Death, maybe. It's not self. The other thing about turning towards impermanence is it can really put us in touch with what actually matters. That we really start to know what we deeply value, and that can become a ground for how we're meeting life, how we wish to live our lives, how we wish to spend our moments. And then I want to talk a little bit about the way in which we mistake that which is suffering for happiness. And this is pointing to the mind's tendency to move out towards experience through the habit of grasping, right, or clinging to what we think is pleasant, and having this kind of wrong view that if we somehow accumulate enough pleasant moments and we minimize the unpleasant, and even to some degree the neutral moments, then we'll have some kind of happiness. It doesn't really work that way. Anybody notice that? It's not, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And the more that we feed our grasping, this idea that being identified with our wanting mind, this time, right? Yes, I've heard the teachings and I know, but this time, sometimes our mind does that. This thing, once I get or have or become or do, then, that one's going to do it. We've got this wrong view around that. And that we don't stay mindful often. We don't stay present with the experience of wanting because the mind is too busy moving towards what it thinks it wants. We're not turning the mind around to feel the experience of wanting itself because the mind is fixated on what it thinks it wants. Once I get, have, do, become, then I will be happy. When we really begin to pay attention to the felt sense of wanting in the body, of trying to get more pleasant, right, or manage the unpleasant, we can feel the contraction in that. And so much of the freedom that comes from practice is actually experiencing the mind letting go, letting loose. This is what the Buddha was pointing to, this possibility of letting loose, right? Letting go. So something to notice in our experience. So let's practice a little bit with this. We'll practice with noticing the changing nature of experience. We'll practice some with the second foundation of mindfulness, the Vedana, that I was just pointing to around pleasant, unpleasant, noticing the habits of mind there around wanting, not wanting. So invitation to get whatever you need for the body to feel supported and at ease for practice. And by the way, if there are questions coming up in the mind or heart space from anything that has been shared today with Ayya Santacitta or myself, there will be also time for questions and responses after the meditation. So I'm just letting you know that now in case the mind is churning out lots of curious reflections or thoughts, there will be time for that. So we'll go into practice now and then we'll come back to that. And so really letting this land and settle in and integrate. And just turning your attention inward. Letting all of the words settle. The words again are just pointing. So we say the finger that's pointing to the moon is not the moon. That somewhere in our being, we know this moonness, right? We know deep in our being what's being pointed to. So with this teaching around impermanence, there's a chant we sometimes do in our tradition where we say, all things are impermanent. They arise and they pass away. To be in harmony with this truth brings great happiness. And so the happiness being pointed to here when we come into harmony with this truth or with any of these truths that we're exploring today. It's not the happiness of getting what I think I want or sense pleasures. It's a different quality of happiness the Buddha was pointing to. On one level, the heart-mind might still be in contention with this truth, right? Not liking the truth of impermanence. You don't have to like it every moment. It's not making us happy in that way. But again, it's this relief that comes with being in harmony with things as they actually are. The part of our being that can actually find refuge in this. And so we turn towards the first foundation of mindfulness, this mindfulness of the body. This body just as it is. Not our ideas about the body, not our concepts or views or judgments or commentary. But the direct, immediate experience of this changing stream of sensations that we call body. You might again connect with that earth element. And feeling and sensing the earth element resting on earth. And noticing the places in the body where there's hardness, firmness, heaviness. Earth element, resting on earth. And perhaps connecting with the breath in the body and feel and sense the breath as this wind element, impersonal, not self. breath breathing itself. And then you might notice if the attention has wandered away, back into that endless thought stream. Just gently guiding the attention back to rest in the body, the breathing body that's here now. And as you rest your attention with the breath, if the breath is a supportive anchor for you, you can just notice where you experience the breath most easily. It's where it's natural for you to notice it. Maybe the belly. You notice their gentle rise and fall of the belly. Maybe you notice it more in the chest or below the nostrils. And you're just gently resting your mindful attention with the breath in the body. And the next time you notice an inhalation, just getting curious as you notice an inhalation. Is an inhalation experienced as pleasant, or is it unpleasant? Is it not strongly pleasant or unpleasant, just maybe more neutral? And likewise with the exhalation. Is it pleasant or is it unpleasant? Or neither? And how is the mind relating to that experience? Whatever it may be that you're noticing. We're noticing pleasant at times. Is there a tendency to kind of lean in, to lean forward, to move towards, to try to hang on to where the mind thinks, now I've got it. Trying to hang on, grasping after what's pleasant. Noticing how we want that to stay. If it's unpleasant, noticing if we're wanting it to change, trying to push away, fix, manipulate our experience. Noticing how it's constantly changing. How is the mind relating to this changing stream of experience? Just noticing with kindness, with curiosity. Perhaps you turn the attention towards just noticing the endings of things, the ending of a breath, or the moment a thought ends. Or a sensation. Maybe it starts out as a dullness or aching in the body, and then we stay with, does it shift or change? And how is the mind-heart relating to that? Trying to get more of, move away from, hang on to. Just noticing. As we rest back and notice some of these habits, pushing away, grabbing on, just noticing the dukkha in that. It's unsatisfactory, trying to grab on to that which is constantly changing, like reaching out and trying to grab onto a stream of water. As we rest with the changing nature of experience, steadying ourselves to witness the change. We find a different ground, and the mind naturally begins to let go. Some of those ways that we're used to trying to hang on out of wisdom. Don't have to feed that thought. Don't have to brace against that unpleasant sensation. Don't have to fix that mind state or that emotion that's here. Just noticing the changing stream of experience. So just gently coming back from the meditation. And so we'll transition now into some space for any questions around practice, around this theme, around what you're noticing in your own practice. And I don't know, Ayya Santacitta, if you'd like to take comments as well, or just questions at this time.
No, everything, yeah. And also, in the chat as well. I think Jay would read them out if people prefer to. Maybe, Jay, could you spotlight me and Celeste together?
Yes, as folks, if you have questions and you would rather not speak them or be on camera, please send them to me in the chat and I can read those out. I'll keep them in flow as other questions are coming through from folks in real time, and then I'll weave in where the questions are coming through in the chat.
Yeah, and also we encourage you to, if you are comfortable asking your question here, that we're quite happy to receive that and have the community also receive that. So however you're comfortable. And I'll hand it to you, Ayya Santacitta.
Maybe, Jay, could you spotlight me and Celeste together? And then whoever, has a verbal question could be spotlighted with us.
The views are really just, I have it set up for co-host and host, so it'll focus primarily on us.
Okay.
It'll pass over to them.
Okay, so whoever has a question, please, raise your hand, and then Marie, please.
Thank you.
So, I just want to say, Celeste and I will alternate with answering. But if you have a question to a particular one of the two of us, then please, you can say that too, if you want to have it answered by Celeste or by me, you can also choose that. But otherwise, we just alternate.
Right. I think this is a question for you, but I'm happy to hear from either of you. When I think about the 4 distortions of reality, particularly the one where seeing things that are not beautiful as beautiful, I don't just focus on the physical body, and I'm wondering if I'm getting a little off track. I felt like I gained some clarity when I realized that something I thought was beautiful, which was my competent organizational skills as a manager at the office, was in fact sometimes really ugly, because it was really my pride and my desire to control things. So I'm wondering if you think about that distortion of reality of things that are beautiful or not beautiful. Is it really just focused on the physical, or can actually be other things like concepts of, being a good manager is actually being a controlling jerk, and that it's not a beautiful thing, that I'm so competent, things like that.
It's, I think in that context, it would be more like suffering, or the kind of the second one, like speaking about that which is unsatisfactory as satisfactory, I think. But if beautiful works better for you, sure, you could do that, And also, just knowing that what is our strength is also a shadow, Being a good manager is a great thing, and the shadow of it is the fear, And it was just probably, an early childhood response to your situation then, rather than, becoming like a, let's say, becoming somebody who is very adjusting to the situation and become very kind of servile or something, rather taking charge. I mean, this is the 2 different styles, of response, to either, take charge or to become very withdrawn, and one of, there's always either is this or that, and both have a shadow. And and you can either, put it under beautiful, but I would rather look at it in the sense of, even you are a great organizer, it's still unsatisfactory. Yeah. Does it make sense?
Yeah, that helps too. Also for you to remind me that maybe that comes from fear, right? Trying to get underneath and trying to see what some of the causation is. Thank you.
I'm myself a good organizer, and I know that it has a lot to do with fear, yeah. Okay, thank you, Marie. And the next person is going to be Sky for Celeste.
Thank you. I had a question around the fourth distortion as well, around mistaking the unbeautiful as beautiful. And I was wondering, it seemed like today we did like an elements body scan, and I was wondering about asubha, or like repulsiveness of the body, or even like death meditation on the further end of that spectrum. And then something maybe more like metta on the other end of the spectrum. I'm wondering, is there a point where contemplating the repulsiveness of the body becomes unwholesome or unhelpful in practice? And how do you practice with that while also appreciating this body or seeing it as, yeah, just appreciating it or taking care of it, or not waxing poetic about how miraculous it is, which is something I feel like I tend to do. So wondering how you balance that feeling of repulsiveness, but also appreciation, perhaps.
I just want to say, I never use the word repulsiveness because I think this is just a very ancient translation, for young monastics who have a lot of lust. But so literally it means not beautiful and not repulsive, so that's just one disclaimer. And handing over to Celeste.
Yeah, I'm glad for the question, because I think it's even in our planning together, I was mentioning how that fourth vipallasa can be challenging for people or confusing. And I can share just a few reflections, but I want to say that I haven't done the death contemplation myself. And, I'm going to hand it to Ayya Santacitta because she's far more experienced, obviously, around all this. But what does come to mind, so a few things. So in terms of our tendencies and balancing our view, this can be a helpful practice, right? Particularly, I've heard it said that, if you look at the three, aversion, grasping, delusion, and you look at it in terms of like Buddhist psychology, that there's maybe a predominant type that you identify with. So some of us may be predominantly aversive with a minor in delusion, or or we're deluded and we don't know it because we're a deluded type. So, but particularly for people who identify with greed. So if the first thing you notice, like the example we sometimes give is somebody walks into a room and that person who is inclined towards greed is going to notice everything in the room that's attractive, that's beautiful, that they like, that they want. The aversive type's going to walk into the same room, notice everything that's wrong with it, what can be fixed, what needs to be changed. The deluded type walks in, doesn't even notice they're in a room, so tendencies of mind. And particularly with somebody who's inclined towards greed or noticing or grasping after what is attractive or beautiful, then that practice can be helpful just for balancing the view, for helping to loosen our grip around our habit of seeing the body in that way. And so it can help with, the impersonal nature of it. I was listening to a talk recently on this topic and preparing for the retreat, and someone was talking about just things like our fingernails, our hair that grows on our body, that there's something about this that is inherently dukkha nature and not self, right? Like that there's something about the fact that we have to cut our hair, we have to do something with it, we have to clip our fingernails all the time. This is not it's never done, and it's impersonal. And that when we clip our fingernails and we see the nails not attached to our body, what is that? Is that me? So there's this habit of identification with and contemplating those aspects of our experience can be really helpful in loosening the grip of that identification and seeing it as not self and seeing the dukkha nature. But just as Ayya Santacitta was saying, it's not about repulsion. To me, it's about balancing the view and the kind of reification of the body and the objectification of it and all of this. And then not the mind that's wanting to turn away from the nature of the body, that's not so appealing, right? So the other example that was given is like we see a young puppy and we want to see like everything that's beautiful and sweet and attractive about that young puppy, but we don't think about the fact that we're going to have to clean up that puppy's poop, you know? They don't put that on the photos when you're needing to, wanting to get a puppy and so on. So there's a way in which we're balancing the view by the way we're turning the mind towards seeing what the mind tends to move away from. But so the last thing I'll say, I want to hand it to Ayya Santacitta and hear what she has to say, but I think if we're already inclined in the direction where maybe we're particularly aversive, or we have challenges around some of the messaging that we've internalized around objectification of the body or things like this, and there can be judgments about that are negative, things like this, and then we're doing that contemplation and we're experiencing a lot of aversion, it's not so helpful, right? So we want to look at what's the purpose of the practice, and are we practicing in a way that's balanced, that supports us in seeing more clearly, not in cultivating aversion to the body. Right? So that's what I would say, and I pass it to Ayya Santacitta. Oh, actually, before I do that, is that useful, Sky? Any response to that?
Yeah, that's super useful. And I am a greed type, so it's useful to balance that. Yeah, in this
And
way. So.
it's helpful to see beauty, right? That can be balancing for us too, when we're just on the suffering side of life and we're not taking in that which is beautiful. But really this teaching around looking at what is the way we take that which is not beautiful to be beautiful, is very interesting to practice with. So yeah, I'm curious what you will say. Ayya Santacitta, pass to you.
I think you said everything perfectly. That's just maybe one thing, is about the teaching, when it arose in Iron Age India in a very, very patriarchal time, which we are still inside of. And there's often, like a tendency to blame the women, because they're just too beautiful, and then that was also part of that, that it got really a little bit ugly. I think, there are some monasteries where there's like images of women, with razor blades all over their body and things like that. I've seen that in Thailand, years ago. And just having that, have the blame has to go somewhere. And that has then, also resulted in using the word repulsiveness, for example, even it's just means not beautiful, the literal word asubha. Subha is beautiful and is a negation of it. So it tells us also something about the worldview, about the historical context, and not falling for that, Yeah, that's just an additional reflection, that the whole Buddhist teaching came to us from a certain time, and it hasn't arisen in a vacuum, it has arisen in a certain cultural context, and now we are trying to update all of the presentation as well, Yeah. So, Jay, is there anybody in the chat?
No, I don't have any questions there.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So then we just see if anybody else would like to ask something or just comment or contribute about your experience. I think it can be very helpful for people, to hear about other people's experience.
I see an actual hand with Mara, Ayya Santacitta, if you want to.
Oh,
I
yeah. Thank you.
actually I did put my question in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't make it to
Didn't make it. Okay.
me. I'm not sure.
Okay. So my question is actually for both of you. First, what do you do when there really is a snake? Literally when hiking, or figuratively when someone is a snake? That's my first question. And the second would be is to Celeste, if Beth really was in the bed with the light on, i.e. if your perceptions were accurate, what would you have done? So those are my two questions.
Well, I think, trust yourself that you know what to do when there's a snake. Of course, you're going to be carefully, remove yourself as soon as you can if it's a poisonous snake, and if you don't know, you do it anyway, because you don't know. And if it's a snake which isn't poisonous, then you just respectfully walk by and go on your way, I think. And the same, if there's a person who is very difficult, then one of course has to have some boundaries and check it out, what's the best way to relate to the person, and to protect oneself in a way which isn't hurting the other person too much, if that is possible. So, and then the other question was about.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that if Celeste, if your perceptions were accurate, if she really was in the bed with her light on, how would you have handled that differently or not?
Yeah, so and I'm in agreement around the when our perceptions are accurate, and there is a snake, or I think this is related to also, Beth, say she was in the room and she was leaving the light on, then it's the noticing, are we in reactive or responsive mind? And so like the reactive mind that's driven by greed and aversion and delusion is only going to create more dukkha for us. Right? So in the sense of recognizing that when we're caught up, like if I had been caught up just the way I was and she was there, that's still mine to notice. Right? That's still mine to notice all the secondary suffering that was being created by the mind having an idea about how she should be behaving and creating this, how she should be behaving, or creating this self out of, oh, I'm the right one, or, all the things our minds do around that. That's the secondary suffering. But that doesn't mean that at some point, in this example, one of the benefits of being on silent retreat in that context is that actually, because we're asked not to speak, we get to see all that reactivity happening inside, and we're not acting from that. We're just noticing. So we get to stay with and feel. So in that way, and I was noticing the feeling of contraction, the wanting and not wanting, the way that I was actually experiencing it in the moment. I was also turning towards what was happening in the mind and the impact of that, right? The idea it should be some other way, or the wanting something else to happen, and so on. But then out in the world, when we come across a snake, going back to that example, right, we want to use discerning wisdom. How do we respond to that? And just as Ayya Santacitta was saying, it's appropriate to protect ourselves, right? So in another context, it may have been appropriate at some point to address with somebody if you're sharing a space and you need to get rest, right? But am I addressing that from a place of responsive mind, not reactive? mindful in the communication without a big added on story about a person being inconsiderate or whatever it was, you know. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit as I'm reflecting back on it. I'm realizing I'm exaggerating a little bit to make a point. It's not like I was really worked up in my mind, but what it was that I could feel the mind moving towards aversion where there hadn't been. And so it was amplified in those conditions, right? And that was an example of kind of what happens in daily life. Those conditions reveal the way that the mind gets organized around our aversive tendencies and so on.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you both. Mhm.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking that.
I do have someone who's sent a response in the chat.
Thank you. Reading it, Trey.
I'll go ahead and read that. It says, I found the body/element contemplation really powerful. What would the world look like if every child learned this in school, parents, community, made this come to pass? So just an offering of gratitude and visioning for the body and element contemplation.
Thank
This
you.
is-
Yeah, that would be such a wonderful thing to include for kids. Yeah. Not complicated, not difficult to do. Rebecca, if you could turn on your camera, that'd be great.
Let me try here. I'm in a kind of crummy Wi-Fi spot, so
All right, if it doesn't work,
may
then
okay. Just 1 second, please.
okay, we see you.
I was just struck today, as I often am, by, you know, on the one hand, when we sit and meditate, you know, we're encouraged to be in the zone of direct experience. And then, you know, frequently in the Dharma talks, we're exposed to aspects of the Dharma that can be so kind of powerfully enhancing of the learning that's going on. And I'm just curious if either of you have any thoughts about how one moves from a kind of erratic exposure to the Dharma that comes, you know, as one goes to first retreats or so on, into something that is more thoroughgoing, because it does seem to be such an essential support and kind of infrastructure to the practice.
I don't, and I didn't really 100% understood your question.
Should I try
Can you
again?
make it shorter?
Concise?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how one moves from how one, in a sense, begins to engage with Dharma study, which I'm struck by as such an essential element of sort of deepening of practice, sort of beyond the exposures one gets, you know, in Dharma talks or even on retreats. I'm guessing that in a way, maybe it's a kind of an obvious answer, which it just has to do with like continue and maybe find a teacher or something like that. But does that make sense at all?
Yeah. I think, you know, I think to get like a certain overview about the practice, you know, to read a few books and also, you know, maybe take some courses, you know, in the, let's say, the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the 3 characteristics, the Noble Eightfold Path, things like that. And for example, you could look on my website. There is a thing about reading, you know, Like there's a section of reading for more beginners, and a section of reading for more for people with some experience. So to work through some of those readings, plus maybe there's also some video talks mentioned. That is very, very good at a certain point, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Definitely, yeah. It's this, you know, like having the map, but not stopping at the map, you know, then you need to visit the territory. But if you visit the territory without a map, it takes much longer, you know.
Yeah. But I think that's a really, beautiful way of capturing what is sort of driving the question. So thank you so much.
And also maybe one more thing is, you know, that sometimes it can be, you know, that you just knowing why you're gonna now wanting to read another book, you know, is it because you don't want to meditate, because, you know, there's an aversion, or is it because you really need that information? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, also would just add that Insight LA has a year-long study program that's starting again in September that I'm on the team for. So it's for Dharma teachers, and we'll take everyone through over the course of a year, like some of the Buddha's lists and the teachings, and have days of practice together in small groups where you can discuss, and is having the elements of hearing the teachings, reflecting, and practicing to help it all come together. And having that in Sangha is really supportive.
Yeah, that sounds great, Celeste. And the reflection, you know, being like the bridge between the practice and the study. And doing it, you know, in community is just much better, I think. You because you're exposed to other viewpoints, and that's incredibly helpful.
Time here. We want to take maybe one more question.
Yes, one more question, and then we hand over to Jay for closing. So, you know, if there is no more questions or comments, maybe Celeste, if you're okay with it, I could do a little sharing of blessing chant before we hand over to Jay. And, you know, if there's anyone of you, you know, who has someone in your lives or a situation in your lives who could do with some good energy, you could, you know, dedicate all of the good energy of your practice with those people or with the situation. And I just see there's a comment in the chat. The person thought, Tia thought we are here till 2 p.m. now. The Daylong is from 10 to 1 Pacific time. So as I'm doing this short chanting, please, you know, keep the person or the situation in your heart. And also, you know, thanking Celeste for a very good first teaching experience together with you, and thanking also Jay for being a wonderful host, and thanking Big Bear for inviting us for this online half day long, and also for the retreat in October. May you have every good blessing. May all the devas protect you by the power of all the Buddhas. May you ever be well. May you have every good blessing. May all the devas protect you by the power of all the Dharma. May you ever be well. May you have every good blessing. May all the devas protect you by the power of all the Sangha. May you ever be well. Celeste, is there something you would like to add?
Thank you. That was beautiful. Maybe I'll just do a brief dedication of merit before Che offers, and then I think Che has some closing announcements. So just appreciating deeply that we do this practice not only for ourselves, but for all those whose lives we touch. Any wisdom, any clear seeing, any benefit or blessing, any merit we've generated in coming together today, we can offer and dedicate that benefit, blessing, wisdom, clear seeing, merit. We can offer it freely and generously to all beings everywhere without exception, really wishing that all beings be free from suffering and that they know the deep peace of a calm, clear mind and an open, loving heart.
Thank you.
And if there aren't any other questions or any other notes, thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday and take this delicious energy into the rest of your week to come. Thank you.